until I see the recording. There we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 1st, 2024 Form-Based Code Area Working Group meeting. We are holding a virtual public meeting today, and all participants with us are joining remotely. I'd like to orient everyone to our virtual environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will be run. Tonight's meeting is available to join from the Form-Based Code Area Working Group webpage, the county's events calendar, and the top of today's agenda. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. If anyone loses internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your video turned off and microphone muted until you're called upon, and turn off sound to any devices around you to minimize interference. These tools are located as icons on your toolbar. If you don't see the toolbar, try tapping or clicking on the center of the meeting, and it will pop, center of your screen, and it'll pop up. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator doesn't have the ability to unmute you. If you're dialing in by phone, press *6 to unmute. When you're finished speaking, please remute your microphone. The meeting chat's active for participants who need technical assistance only, and should not be used for discussion, for public comment, questions about agenda items, or requests for more information. All comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. If AWG members wish to be recognized to speak on an item, please turn on your video feed and leave your microphone muted. Please also use the raise hand functionality. I will use the video feeds and raised hands as an indicator of who would like to speak. Once you've been recognized, you may unmute, and once you've completed speaking, please turn your video feed back off. One moment, Maren. Do we have any? I believe we are expecting one member, Linda Dye, to come in by phone. Hi, Linda. I see that you are here with us through Teams. So normally I would say something about participating by phone right now, but I don't see any phone numbers on the screen. I will ask people to let me know if you are on phone and I'm missing some information. If we have any public speakers tonight, I will go over that information as we get towards the end of the meeting. Lastly, a reminder that this is a public forum, and today's agenda will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. I'm going to turn it over then to Ms. Sondag to introduce our agenda items.
Sure, I'll go ahead and share my screen. We have one agenda item this evening, which is the fourth Barcroft renovation use permit. So this one is located at 1320 South George Mason Drive. All right, so just to kind of orient you, because this is now the fourth use permit that we're looking at, here are the 4 different use permits that have been considered so far. We had phase 1, which was approved by the county board in July of 2023. Phase 2, which was approved in December of 2023. We have phase 3, which you all reviewed back in March. That one's going to the board this month. And then phase 4, which we'll be looking at tonight, is on track to go to the county board this June. So again, we're continuing to review all of these use permits that are within the existing conservation areas while we're continuing to review and analyze the Jared Lynch Master Financing and Development Plan. So these will allow the applicant to kind of start to make movements on the interior renovations and upgrades and start delivering some of those upgraded homes for residents. So to take a look at this in the context of the entire Columbia Pike corridor, again, this one's located within the neighborhoods area form-based code. You can see in the red area on the screen. And then within the central subarea regulating plan, you can see the outline here in red on the screen of these buildings 47 and 48. As you can see, these are this area is completely located within an existing conservation area. It's not adjacent to any of our required building line frontages, and then doesn't have any adjacent to conservation area designations. The other thing to point out here is the preserved natural area that's designated on the kind of northern portion of the property. You can see it kind of in this triangular area. And then I'll just highlight a quick summary of the proposal, and the applicant will provide a little more detail about the changes that are proposed. So again, this is buildings 47 and 48, preservation, and then a renovation of both of those buildings. The unit count will remain at about 73 units. The applicant will provide a little more detail on this. And right now, depending on the kind of some of the responses to some staff comments, the proposed accessible units in these buildings will range anywhere between 2 and 4 units. They're also proposing another community gathering space similar to some of the previous use permits we've seen. Again, we've got that natural preserve area located on the northern portion, which in this area is to the far left of the screen. Right now, there's 1 tree proposed for removal. So very minimal impacts to trees. And then they're again requesting modifications for existing buildings to remain. And then lastly, just a quick view of the schedule. This item did go to the Design Review Committee and to the HLRB twice. We're here at the Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group, and the next steps will be to the Planning Commission and the Housing Commission in June, and then County Board on June 15th. So with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll invite the applicant to provide a brief presentation.
Thank you, Olivia. Let me bring up our slides real quick. Here we go. Can everyone see that? Thanks. All right. Hi, good evening, everyone. Always good to see you folks. For the record, I'm Lauren Riley with Walsh Colucci. We represent the applicant, Gyre Lynch Real Estate Partners. And what's that saying? 4th time is the charm. I think this is our 4th renovation use permit. And I think we've got a good program here and a good scope of work. Joining me tonight from Gyre Lynch is Alice Hageman. And we'll just be walking you through. Olivia covered, oh, and sorry, Brian Bracey's here as well. Olivia covered a lot of the background for this site, but just to kind of show you where these buildings are in relation to the historic phases of Barcroft. As Olivia noted, we've had phases 1, 2, and 3 within kind of this first section, this first phase of construction of Barcroft. This phase 4 here will be our first renovation phase in kind of what's called the newer sections constructed in the later 1940s. So these buildings have a slightly different historic character than the ones we've reviewed before. Let's go to the aerial where you can see in the greater context of Barcroft where these are located off South George Mason Drive and up this driveway here. There are 73 units across these 2 buildings today. All of them are 1- and 2-bedroom units, and none of them are accessible units. So photos of the existing buildings, looking at number 1, this is George Mason Drive right here. So we're looking at the corner of building 47 as it goes up 13th Road here and continues down South George Mason Drive here. And then on this side's a little bit closer of a look here at the left side of that building as it transitions from brick to more painted yellow brick. This is an image of from the courtyard of the interior building. If you can see the key, there's quite a large interior courtyard there. And then up at the top, this is a view from kind of the top of the driveway looking down. And then here's building 48, which sits at the top of the hill. It's just this long rectangular building there at the top. And this is the front as you come up the driveway. This is the front facade of the building. You can see these kind of 3 main ornamental entrances. There's this basement level that's partially exposed that then gets tucked into the grade, as you can see on the rear facade here, as that hill slopes upward. And then this is the kind of right corner of the building on the low side. And this area right here where the doors are, there's currently a maintenance shop in that area of the basement that serves this building and a couple other buildings nearby. And there's an opportunity here, as we'll discuss in a moment, to create two new accessible units here and take advantage of this grade here. It's flat at the bottom and it's in front of parking spaces, so it's ripe for accessibility. And then I won't belabor all of these the scope of this renovation, but it's very similar to the ones that you've seen before, and we have met with the HALRB and the DRC regarding this scope, and they were supportive. We'll be doing things like cleaning up the brick. We'll be taking out those PTAC units there on the front and infilling the brick. We will have to, unlike previous renovations, due to the layout and the floor plans of these units, we will have to add a minimal amount of front facade vents in order to meet building code requirements for exhaust ventilation. This is something we discussed with the HALRB last month, and we worked through that design with them. And then we will be able to convert two basement units in building 48, the one that sits at the bottom of that hill on George Mason Drive. We'll be able to convert two of those to accessible units, and we have the potential to create two new accessible units in building 47 that I just showed you, but we are working on figuring out a solution to stay at the total 73 units, which is a form-based code requirement. We can't create any more units than exist on the site today. So we're working through a solution that might involve combining units in building 48 or 47 to create a larger family-sized unit and be able to retain the accessible units, or we may have to remove units from one of the two buildings. So that's something we're working through right now. And then we'll also, like the previous renovation use permits, we'll be adding an amenity area here. As you can see in our landscape plan, there's that large courtyard there behind building 47. We'll be adding some seating areas, some places for these folks to gather there, and it'll feel like a private space to them as it's tucked in their building. Normally, we're able to add amenity areas to serve both buildings, but as you saw in the photos, this is a large hill up here, so there's really no opportunity to add something behind building 47, but there may be opportunity in the future for these folks to access the amenity area that will be across the driveway there, or this amenity area here that we'll add. And then here also you can see the ramps that we'll be installing to get folks into the accessible units here, and then for those units to also be able to access the courtyard. Just walk you through some of the elevations that we spoke with the HALRB and the DRC about. This is that corner of building 47. George Mason Drive is right here, and the driveway with parking is here. This is the area where the ramp will be installed in a new building entrance for these two accessible units.
Excuse me, Lauren, I'm sorry to interrupt your presentation, but you keep referring to here and here and here.
Oh, sorry. Are you not able to see the pointer?
No, I'm not. I don't know if other people are.
No, I cannot see the pointer.
I'm sorry about that. I thought this whole time I've been.
There it is.
Oh, now it is. I'm sorry about that. Well, let me complete this presentation then, and Mark, if you want me to go back and note anything else, I'm happy to do that. So on my screen, it looked like I had the laser pointer. It looks like it just started working right now. So back to this elevation. Here's George Mason Drive. Here, and then the driveway as you come up on this side. The two new accessible units will be accessed through a corridor here. So we've added a new entrance and a canopy, and that canopy will remain for the accessible units. And then there's a ramp here for access. And then this is the rear elevation, again, as it steps down from the top of that hill down toward George Mason Drive here on the right. This is a view of the courtyard. Again, we'll add a ramp here for folks to be able to access from the accessible units into the courtyard. And then on to building 48, that's that long rectangular building. And we've worked with the HALRB and the DRC on this design to add these 2 new entrances to the basement that don't conflict with the existing ornamental entrances. So you'll see that they carry down kind of the same vertical expression from the windows into the doorways that are more minimalist than the other main entries to the building. And then, as with the past projects, Virginia Housing, as you all know, they do require canopies for all main residential entrances, and they also require cladding of wood trim. And we feel confident that we will be granted a waiver from adding canopies to non-accessible units and from having to clad wood trim with vinyl or aluminum. Though we do continue to include that in our request, just in case that waiver is denied by Virginia Housing, though we will note the canopies will remain on all accessible unit entrances. Those are new entrances that are directly into the accessible unit, whereas the other main entrances are into a corridor whereby residents then access their unit. And then just for an overview, very similar scope of applications here. We filed our form-based code use permit with staff, and we're requesting modifications of the form-based code requirements to allow the existing building setbacks and parking to remain as is. We're asking for modifications of conservation area standards to allow for those new openings for the accessible units, as well as for the ventilation and the use of fiberglass materials for new doors, which is also a requirement by Virginia Housing. And then that kind of second tranche of modification of the conservation area standards, or what I was just talking about, we need to preserve the ability to have canopies and cladding in the instance that Virginia Housing denies our waiver request. And then that concludes our presentation for tonight. Happy to go back and review anything else if there was any confusion about where anything was located previously in the presentation. Thanks, everybody.
So I think that we will initially open it up to any informational questions and then get into broader discussion. Ms. Sontag, let me know if you have any other thoughts.
No, I think Lauren captured that pretty well. So on to the questions.
We will start with Linda Dye.
Hi, I've got some questions about the accessible units. What's prompting this is one of the officers of our Douglas Park Civic Association lives in Barcroft, and he had questions about how the creation of the ADA units actually takes place. And his concern was that if you're adding a new entrance into each unit, are the occupants going to lose some living space? It appeared from materials that he saw before that perhaps that the occupants would lose a closet area. I'm not quite sure, but I'd like to hear more details about what actually is the impact of creating the ADA unit, and specifically, would the future occupant lose some of the living space that the non-ADA units would have?
Sure. And so Alice or Brian chime in here, but I think the average square footage for these new accessible units is going to be comparable to the other units in the building. And I'll also note that when these were constructed in the 40s and the 50s, some of these units can be quite large and the layouts be fairly inefficient. And we are able to kind of gain space or gain bedrooms or closets and things like that just by increasing the efficiency of the layout. But I'll let Alice if you wanna jump in here.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the plan to be able to talk to it a little better. But I will, the reality is by increasing the circulation in the space, we are going to lose some usable floor space, right? Because of, door swing and as you mentioned, needing to use closets. But to us, it was a necessary sacrifice or a valuable sacrifice in order to achieve, to create these accessible units. It's been a very challenging endeavor to create accessible units at the site given the topography. So we're taking advantage where we can. And to Lauren's point, I mean, on a more positive note, we are, when we do create these accessible units, we're often doing more redesign work, which allows us to be more efficient with the space. I mean, the one bedroom units can be 800 square feet here sometimes, and that's a very large, one bedroom unit, much larger than we see in typical market rate new construction these days. So there's lots of space to be utilized more efficiently, and when we are, whether it's creating a new unit as we are in building 48 or reconfiguring an existing one, we are taking advantage of maybe inefficient floor space to utilize it more efficiently.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
It's a valid concern. I appreciate the question.
Well, it just so happens that one of our officers lives in Barcroft now. And so we're very glad that he can contribute to the overall thinking of how we make this work for everybody. So
I
thank
agree.
you.
I'm happy to have that direct feedback. That's really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Going to go to Betty Siegel.
Hi, this is Betty. I apologize for not putting my camera on. I just had oral surgery and my face looks like somebody punched me. But I thought I heard, and I joined just a few minutes late, but did the speaker say something about we might have been able to get more accessible units if it weren't for the form-based code? Did I hear that?
Lauren, do you want to field that one? Or
Yeah, Olivia, did you want to take that or do you want me to?
Sure, I can
Yeah.
start us off. So as part of the request for modifications for these existing buildings to remain, one of the requirements is that there's no additional density proposed. And I think, the exact language is beyond the number of units legally existing in buildings at the time of application. So the problem here is because the applicant needs these modifications for setbacks and for parking, we can't allow any additional units to be constructed. For example, in the first phase, we could allow for larger units, so for changes in the mix of unit types, but we just can't add to that total unit number. So I'll let Lauren speak to at least how the applicant's exploring options, but that's at least the form-based code limitation.
Right. And I think that's the nuance, Olivia, is that we are able to create larger bedrooms, but not create additional units because of the form-based code regulations. And so we were quite excited to be able to find this space at grade in building 48 to create new units. However, we have run into that provision of the form-based code, and our team's currently evaluating options with the priority of trying to keep those two new accessible units in building 48 is that's important, but we're looking at what our options are across those two buildings to consolidate units or eliminate units in order to stay at that maximum 73 unit count.
Okay, so this is Betty. I'm sorry, I have to jump in. I don't know. I was part of the form-based code. I don't remember there being some exclusion that would discriminate against people with disabilities by limiting the ability to create accessible units. So could someone point to me where in the form-based code exactly it says that? Because I'm really uncomfortable with everything that you just said. Not you, but the fact
But
that somehow
the result of
code
the
is being
yeah.
interpreted to create to eliminate the possibility of a more accessible community when really the form-based code, the whole discussion, the whole time has been on how the form-based code needs to be leverage to create more accessibility in a community where we're getting more diversity. So I don't know. I'd like to see some actual black and white on that, please.
Sure. So I can start us off again. So that language is under the section 205 of the Neighborhoods Form-Based Code, the modifications section, section 205B2, the D, if we're getting specific about it. But it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't differentiate between, how we treat standard units versus accessible units. And in this case, I think Lauren and Alice have said, they are exploring options. It's really just that they need to stay at that 73 unit cap. So it's possible that these 2 additional units on the basement level that are accessible can remain. It just means that they would need to take 2 other units, non-accessible units, somewhere else offline, or the hope is that they could be incorporated into providing some larger family-sized units elsewhere in the building. So I think that's the hope, but again, they're still in the exploratory stage.
Yeah, those are definitely our goals. Plan A Plan A, I would say, is create family size units. Plan B would be to eliminate the non-accessible units. It really boils down to the construction pricing and how the numbers pan out with the design. Excuse me, but that is definitely the direction we are moving in.
Yeah.
So Betty,
I'll
the hope
reiterate.
would be.
Sorry. I'll reiterate Jarlich's, priority to create and provide accessible units where we can, especially when we have good opportunities like this in the renovation areas. But to just go back to the code for 1 second, I think the intent of that provision of the form-based code was to not increase the degree of nonconformity of any buildings that might remain. So it's very similar to the zoning ordinance provisions for nonconforming buildings, where you can maintain and keep them, but not increase the degree to which they're nonconforming. And the form-based code is providing an option to make certain modifications in order to allow those buildings to remain because they are historic, but I think is concerned with increasing the amount of density or increasing that degree of nonconformity with the zoning ordinance requirements. Unfortunately, it's implementation here is forcing us to kind of grapple with some issues with the total amount of units, but we are looking at that now, and Olivia can update you all once we're able to finalize that decision.
Okay.
Ed, I'm going to exercise I'm sorry, Betty?
I'm sorry, this is Betty. I will stop. I will not beat a dead horse, but I will go on. I do really feel strongly to go on record that when you have the chance to make accessible units, it is a priority of the neighborhood and of Arlington County to create accessible units. And excuses like these can be brought up before the county and waivers can be made. So I'm really interested in this topic, would like to hear more, would like to see what the creative solutions are. And now I'm done.
Thanks, Betty. And I'm gonna exercise chair's privilege with a question that's potentially on topic, which is and apologies if this has been covered in an earlier meeting, but when a laundry room is vacated because all of the units have in-unit washer dryer, what becomes of that space? When I was walking the complex the other day, I noticed at least one laundry room that seemed to be roughly the size of a unit. So I'm curious about the plans are for that.
Right. I'll let Alice and Brian jump in. Typically, we are able to capture those spaces as resident storage or additional maintenance space for the buildings.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Resident storage is going to be our primary use, and that's a lot of what the basement spaces are used now. There is an exorbitant amount of basement space. Yeah, I was going to say we've looked into kind of enlarging basement units into that storage space in previous phases, and probably here as well. To be honest, there isn't as much basement space here as there is in other phases, but we've looked at expanding an existing unit into that unused space to create a larger, family-sized unit, unsuccessfully, but that was studied, I will say, in past phases. But yeah, as Lauren said, the goal would be to create storage spaces, and the basements are in varying conditions with regards to waterproofing and conditioning, and we'll get them dry and usable.
Yeah,
They won't be
and
conditioned or finished or anything. I should say that we're not putting any flooring down or air conditioners or anything like that.
right, and there's limits to what you can do in those spaces by the building code, Allison. That might be what's prohibiting expanding units into some of those areas, is that being in the basement, as you all know, in Barcroft is quite hilly. There's a lot of topography, so there's not always a window, or the window doesn't meet the building code size, or the ceiling height's not there. Those are all things that the team is looking at.
Yeah, the topography is certainly an architectural challenge at this site,
Yeah.
to say the least. So that is honestly what, as I mentioned previously, what makes the accessible unit so difficult to place in this site as well.
Right. Thank you. Ed, thank you for your indulgence. Please go ahead.
Yes. So I'd like to reemphasize what Betty's talking about. I've been involved with the form-based code since the charrettes back at the Sheraton in like 2005 or whenever we did that. And we had very much input from the neighborhood, from all the people that live here, and of all different kinds of folks. And we all wanted to improve the housing situation for people. First, of course, the very beginning, of course, was the business area. But when we go into the neighborhoods, we want to improve the housing for neighbors. And I think we should very much ask the county board for a waiver on this particular instance, because you have found space. In other words, the maintenance rooms were not originally contemplated in the form-based code. Sorry, we didn't know there was going to be a maintenance room. But now you have found space, and it seems logical because on this site, you said the topography is very challenging. I don't like that word. I think it is actually very interesting to have the topography with hills and adds variety. I really don't like it when people say that a hill is a challenge. No, a hill is an opportunity to have a property look better, nicer, more interesting. But anyway, you have the opportunity to put in accessible units at grade, which is very rare to find anywhere in old construction. And we most certainly should take advantage of this. And I definitely think that we never intended, when we set up the form-based code, that there was going to be a draconian set of rules and regulations. It was supposed to be guidelines. As long as things fall within the accepted guidelines, you can do this. This is something that I think what is more, the higher priority is the accessible units for our neighbors. And I would like to emphasize that.
I will say I don't think the topography in general is challenging. I agree it's quite beautiful and adds I mean, I love the site in general. It's just challenging to create accessible units within that topography. So I appreciate your sentiments that it only adds to the character of the site and really makes it quite spectacular.
Right, and thanks for your comment, Ed. I'll add to that. We would request a waiver if we could to add these accessible units. We absolutely would. I think staff would support it, and I think the county board would support it. But what is limiting us is the language of the form-based code, and I agree, not the intent of everyone who was involved in creating neighborhoods form-based code when it was adopted back in 2013. I think it's just an unfortunate consequence of that language. Because we are limited to that list in 205B. It lists allowable modifications, and I think there are only two types of modifications that we can make, and they usually are related to the topography of the site, the relationship of the existing buildings to new development, and other minor tweaks here and there to the prescribed nature of the code. So again, we would absolutely do it if we could. We're a little hamstrung by this provision.
Lauren and Olivia, let me ask you, because we've got this other process happening at the same time, right? And because there's lead time between entitlement and issuance of permits, and then often lead time between issuance of permits and burning of diesel. What, if anything, would prevent us from carrying over this conversation into our land use analysis review as a potential recommendation for an amendment to the form-based code and neighborhoods plan? And then if that were to happen in, well, Olivia, then like hypothetically speaking, what's the earliest at which that could that happen within the time frame that we've talked about for the commissions and the board? And then Lauren, if that were to happen in the time frame that we've talked about, would that be soon enough for you and the applicant to come back to seek entitlement for those for to do that before your sort of financial and other operational clocks start dinging before you've got to start moving forward? In other words, can I guess the question just comes down to, is it feasible to use the other process to address this concern?
So I can speak to it from a processing side, and then Lauren or Alice can probably speak to it from an applicant's timing perspective. But during this first half of the year, before we take this land use analysis and any change updates to the master financing and development plan to the county board in July, it would not include form-based code amendments. The second half of the year is really where we're going to take this vision, this land use analysis vision that's being adopted in July, and implement any of those changes into the form-based code. So that's ideally when any of these code amendments, such as could be, something like this that just kind of adds more clarifying language, or, exceptions for, certain, types of properties or something, but that would be a second half of the year item. It would not be in time for this particular use permit. And Lauren, if you want to talk to the timeline of this one.
Sure.
But you can amend a use permit, right? Like, well,
right.
I guess Lauren, I'll let you talk, and then yeah.
And Commissioner, that's something I've been thinking about in the past couple of days as well. And I think Alice can jump in on the Virginia housing financing side. So this use permit is, we're going to the June Planning Commission and County Board hearings so that we can file for Virginia housing tax credit financing by the July deadline. And then, of course, there's a long period of time between then and when Gyre Lynch is able to close on the property. But I think what's important to note is that in that period of time, Virginia Housing is going to allocate a certain sum of money that is based on the number of units the project is able to provide. So Alice, I don't know if you're able to restructure that that agreement with them, or if the allocation is dependent on the number of units. If that affects the Virginia housing piece of it, the reality might be that they would have to withdraw that application and refile another year and try to get a use permit amendment, which would not be feasible, I don't think, in order to meet the timeline that we've set for ourselves. But we would be able to take advantage of that provision for future phases. So Alice, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Is it possible, before you guys jump in, is there anything that would prevent the work from being designed in such a way that you could go back into the building to make another unit? Like, a lot of those storage and laundry units, I saw some nodding heads when I pointed out that they share the footprint of the apartment above them, and it's because they share the footprint of the apartment above them, right? Like, losing storage isn't great, but that's what we're talking about, that space, aren't we? Like, or we're talking about subdividing. So I'm going to stop talking again, sorry, and let you all speak.
I'd have to circulate the question about our ability to change that sort of major detail, a unit count detail in our Virginia housing application. My experience is that Virginia housing isn't particularly flexible and sort of does, you know, that would threaten our general project timing if we tried to modify our application midway through the process. I, if I felt like we had a certain level of confidence that we would be granted a waiver from the on the form-based code side of it, I would suggest we go in with the 75 units instead of 73. But again, that's at risk for us. You bring up an interesting point on, creating the units in such a way that we have them kind of ready to be modified, but that brings us into our basis and getting the financing for that work, right? We need that a financing vehicle for those efforts, and to include that in a basis so that that's why we go through the whole Virginia housing process. So,
would you be able to proceed at 73 and then in future cycles seek supplemental for the 2? Right, you could, is there a way to go to the, I can't remember the name of the funder that you said. I think you said Virginia Housing.
Virginia Housing.
And say that local ordinances have changed such that we are able to add additional units to build out spaces that we didn't have
Sure.
regulatory authority to seek building out.
So I don't want to be, and you're just full of
These are all
naysaying. I'm not-
hypothetical. These are all,
Yeah.
we're talking about,
I will circulate the question. There's other folks on our team more on the finance side of things that would have probably more immediate answers. My instinct, or what I've been told previously, is we're not allowed to really mix phases because these parcels are sold off to different LIHTC investors. So a different entity may invest in this current phase that we're talking about, as opposed to the next one, and trying to do this work kind of across phase lines would not be suitable.
Mm-hmm.
That's my instinct. That being said, I will circulate it. I just don't want to overpromise, underdeliver.
Yeah, let us look into that, and we'll get back to Olivia, and she can circulate that answer with you all.
Lauren and Olivia, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there a notion for when, if we did go the route of modifying the form-based code as part of this larger process? You mentioned the second half of the year. Would that be December 2024? Would that be
let's just say December, January. Okay. I think
that's helpful for me to have those conversations internally.
Is this something? Well, let me ask a different question, right? Do we necessarily need to wrap it up into the other process? And the alternative, is there any reason that we couldn't just send it to ZOCO right away and start the ball rolling as a standalone amendment, right? To the extent that a problem has been identified, right? That I think it's safe to say there's a clear community consensus that we should not be that this is inconsistent with the spirit of the form-based code. I'm not to say that the AWG represents the community, but I would be surprised to learn that there isn't, near perfect correlation there, right? And just move it forward. I know calendars are busy, and Olivia, this is another one where I don't mean to put you on the spot, but maybe this is a question you can take to your colleagues.
Yeah, we're absolutely.
And maybe Lauren, the question to you was, would there be interest in you and your client and your colleagues in pursuing that option?
We're absolutely discussing it. I think the struggle is that, while it may make sense and would, is preferential for this property, we have to consider what that would mean for other properties where they have existing nonconformities they're asking for waivers from zoning ordinance requirements, and we have a very select few, modifications to these zoning ordinance requirements that we allow, again, with the intent that your existing building envelope density is just to remain. So I know we're hearing two different things. I think that, one is just for including as many accessible units as is feasible on the site. And the second kind of related, but maybe separate item is the opportunity to increase the number of units on site. I think what we're hearing from the applicant is that accessible units is the first priority that we're looking at. And then the second priority is looking at either family-sized units or, reconsidering the number of units on site.
Well, and I think that one way of cabining it off, and I'm stepping a little bit on the architect's toes here, and I apologize for that. But one way of cabining it off from other sites is that there's something unique here, given the movement of given that we're building washer dryer into every unit, right? In-building storage is important, and I'm not, and I don't mean to second guess that, right? But like, we're talking about a unit. We're not talking about adding units to the footprint, right? The way that I'm assuming the way that this would be accommodated is, for the most part, maybe some renovations, maybe some additions, but for the most part, we're talking about using the unit that wasn't built out as a unit. If I'm wrong about that, let me know, because I can get ahead of myself. I have a tendency to get ahead of myself, but I think that on right away distinguishes it from other circumstances. And there might be other ways of doing it too, but that's what occurs to me, Olivia. But I take your point is taken, right? The conversations have to be had about how do we do this in a way that is deliberative, and yeah. I have if there's no one else who has any questions on this topic, I have a question on a different topic. So I don't want to move us away from that before anyone else. Mark, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks. Just a quick question on the waiver for canopies and the wood cladding. What's the justification or the reasoning that you're going to be presenting for that waiver?
Right. Thanks, Mark. And as we started off with our first renovation phase, if you recall, we built in the option to keep those, but with the intent to request a waiver from Virginia Housing, and they did grant it. And the justification there is because these are historic buildings, and adding canopies and cladding, the wood trim, would diminish the historic nature and importance of those buildings, as well as jeopardize potential state tax credits for preservation of those buildings. And I think Virginia Housing so far has been pretty responsive to those justifications, and I think they will moving forward. Though, because it is a discretionary process, we will continue to request the modifications on the zoning side, so that there won't be any issues with the financing, but with the intent and the expectation that Virginia Housing would grant the waiver, and we wouldn't have to kind of intrude on those historic facades.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about windows. As I was walking the property, I noticed that an awful lot of the buildings, especially the ones that are away from Columbia Pike, still have the original rolled steel, sometimes usually hung, sometimes casement. And it looks to me from the renderings that you're providing us that you're planning on installing pretty builder basic vinyl double hung windows.
So
I'm seeing shaking heads, which I'm glad to see, because I know that historic vinyl and historic aluminum windows exist. I've been involved in projects that outside of Arlington that have used them and had to use them at great expense. I'm not saying you should be undertaking great expense, but please tell me more about the shaking heads that I was seeing. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just go to one of these slides, Commissioner.
The vinyl windows that you see on site were previously were replaced by the previous owner.
That I know. Yep.
4 years. Yep. So in the past applications that we've submitted, where the windows have already been replaced in buildings, we are proposing, or we have approved to just
Mhm.
keep in the same style. But
That
here,
makes
where they
sense.
haven't been replaced, we would go in with an aluminum window
Okay.
to honor the historic
Okay.
design.
That
Yeah, and
wasn't.
here's some additional photos.
Oh, great.
To see. So we're not quite sure if these are the original metal windows for the building, but we have identified that they are
Original.
they are metal, and they are in quite poor shape. They really do
bad.
need to be replaced given the current condition of these windows. But as we discussed with the HLRB and the DRC, was that we have been able to identify a couple manufacturers for aluminum casement windows that will be replacing. And as Alice
great.
mentioned, where we do have vinyl windows in the development is where the previous owner had already swapped them out, and we would just kind of continue to maintain that for those buildings that already have it.
Is the plan to reflect that when those windows reach out end of life, that they would be replaced with something that tries to return it to a historical condition? And if not, is that something that we can try to get memorialized somewhere?
Are you referring to the renovation phases, the buildings that already have vinyl windows for when the?
Well, let's assume that there is a population of buildings that have vinyl windows and are not subject to redevelopment, right? Vinyl windows do have, they last longer, they last a long time, but they do have a lifespan. So I assume that they would have to be replaced at some point. It would be nice to have something memorialized that we would try to restore the look and feel of the original windows, rather than just replace Anderson's cheapest double hung with Anderson's cheapest double hung.
Understood the desire there overall to return it to its original historic nature. I think that the problem there is that these windows will kind of reach the end of their life at different time periods. So
yeah, that's right.
That would not be ideal to have some metal, some vinyl on a building, or some buildings and not others. So that, I think that's issue number one. And then another thing I'd like to note is I don't have the language in front of me right now, but this the HALRB and the form-based codes conservation area follows the Secretary of Interior's conservation standards for existing buildings. And they have identified essentially, and I can go back and try to find this language for you, that the window type is not necessarily detrimental to the historic fabric of the building, especially if it's already been replaced. And so that's why HLRB and DRC have not had heartburn over this through our past 3 renovation use permits.
Well, I'm certainly going to do my best to not get out ahead of HRLB on historic preservation and restoration issues. But I am glad to see that. And if it's not noted in the slide presentations, and there's a good chance that it is, and I just missed it, but I would request or suggest that you note in the presentations, because it was upon seeing the ones that you showed today, looked enough like the vinyl windows that have already been installed that I would have been grateful for an asterisk. I would have been happy to see an asterisk. Let me say Let me say that.
Thank you for that note. We can certainly highlight that in our future presentations to the Planning Commission and the County Board. It is noted on our plan sheets and in the slides. It's just something that I did not specifically call out today.
I overlooked it. I appreciate that, both of you. Then let me ask one other question, assuming that no one else wants to weigh in on windows. Not seeing any hands go up. I, in conversation with someone who lives in Arlington and has been active in these on Columbia Pike issues for some time, came to understand that the foundations of a lot of these buildings, especially the ones that were built in the 40s, were built in a hurry and were laid and cured with methods that are no longer used, in part because they impact the longevity of the foundation. And so I'm just curious about And I should have asked this the first time we had one of these meetings, but I'm curious about what studies have been undertaken to ensure that the foundations of these buildings don't need any, or to identify any buttressing, that's not the right word, any work done to ensure that they have a lifespan that matches the investment, while the building is vacant, while the building has fewer people living in it for the purpose of doing the renovations, while you can get to the foundation easily, I guess is what I'm getting at.
The
Right, I
damage,
think we,
that's what it's
sorry, Ed.
called, spawing.
Okay.
We went through this in Arlington Village. We spent $10.5 million. It's the concrete, it's spawing. That's what you're dealing with.
So that might not be information that we have for you tonight, but I think that Gyra Lynch have structural consultants.
We
that they
do. We
could-
have Elliot Bryant is our structural engineer on this phase, as well as RB1. We also have Wis Janey that we've hired to do a comprehensive survey. So Wis Janey actually worked on the Washington Monument. They are very, very well qualified here in the region. But between they're more of a waterproofing consultant, but they have experience with foundations as well. So between those two consultants, we're doing comprehensive studies to make sure that any repairs that will, it's in our best interest for these
Right,
buildings to be
yeah.
around a long time as well. So we are making
Right.
sure we're putting in any work now that will move in that direction.
As the bearer of the risk, of course, but
Of
I
course.
just, it's good to ask and ensure that, one thing we don't want happening is in 25 years, Gyra Lynch or its successors in interest to be coming to us and saying, well, actually, these buildings that have been preserved for decades and decades and decades need to be torn down, because the foundations were cured with salt and are no longer good. So it's a miracle that none of those buildings have fallen down a hill yet. Knock wood. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for your time. We appreciate it,
And
and we'll be in touch with Olivia on those follow-up questions.
well, I just want to confirm that we don't have any other.
Oh, sorry.
Before we adjourn, yeah, sorry, Lauren. That was just my questions. Ed, back to you.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could, maybe this is for Olivia, but if you can tell us a bit about Saturday, the open house, what we can expect, what's going to be going on.
Sure. So the open house is going to be held at the Barcroft Apartments, kind of in their meeting room space near the leasing office. It's just a free-flowing, open 10 a.m. To 1 p.m. There won't be any, staff or applicant presentations. We're basically going to have stations set up similar to all of the topic areas that were discussed at each of the working group meetings. So one on kind of, preservation and redevelopment areas, transportation, open space, urban design. And then we'll have a couple a station on kind of phasing diagrams. Gates Hudson will also have a table there so that residents who have questions about anything related to property management have some resources there. I think we have a handful of people from the Gyra Lynch team helping to staff these as well. So we'll have lots of at least subject matter experts from both the applicant side and the staff side available at each of those stations. We'll have staff and people from the applicant team kind of floating around just to help answer questions and guide people to areas of interest there. There's going to be food. I think the Pan American Bakery, we're getting some empanadas from there, and then there will be some kind of children's activity that's being hosted by Studio Pause. So it should be a great event. I think we've heard from quite a number of people that they plan to attend, but it's all going to be information that was already shared at the working group. So you'll recognize many of the plan sheets shared at the stations. They're all reflective of applicant presentations that have already been shared at the working group meetings.
Well, how about the walkthrough of the property? What time is that?
So we're not organizing a formal walkthrough of the property. I think, we will have,
Well, I'm disappointed because that was my original request at the very first meeting, that we have a walkthrough of the property. So I'm very disappointed that there's not a walkthrough scheduled. That was my request.
yes, I recall the request. I know we've talked about it. I think that, after the open house, after having been, kind of able to orient yourselves with those maps, I think people are free to walk through the property respectfully. That is people's homes, but we're not organizing any kind of scheduled walking tour.
Ed, let's you and I chat at least on Saturday. I'll show you. I'll highlight some things that are worth checking out. But I'm not sure that there are things that would have come up or would have been productive if we had all been walking together. But at a minimum, I can show you some of the things that I noticed.
Thank you.
Anything else for the applicants? And your hand is still up, but I assume that that's just because your hand is still up. Thanks. Well, then I am going to, unless there's anything else from Lauren or Olivia, I am going to declare this meeting adjourned. Olivia, you've got.
I do have
Yep.
two quick development updates.
Thank you.
But want to allow the applicant team to hop off if you'd like. So thank you all for
Thank you
joining
all.
this evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one.
So I'll go ahead and share my screen really quick. The one item that I wanted to highlight, this did come up at our meeting on March 13th. Just wanted to provide two kind of for your awareness updates. There will be a use permit discontinuance going to the county board this May for the Elliott site, the Fillmore Gardens Shopping Center site. So the applicant has formally requested that the county board discontinue the use permit, citing, among several things, a high tax assessment that's caused kind of a hardship for the property. So for the time being, they're going to basically terminate the use permit, try to complete the work necessary to lift the condemned status of those retail buildings. And that is the applicant's kind of near-term plan, is to hopefully get tenants to reoccupy those spaces while they consider any kind of long-term plans for the site. So any questions about that application? And if not, I have just an update on one other non-form-based code application.
Olivia, it looks like that is not coming to the Planning Commission. Is that correct? Or am I missing it when I look at the agenda?
Nope, that's correct. It's not going to the Planning Commission.
Okay. I think that this is more for, I guess, maybe my ask of you is to convey this to Matt, and I'll mention it to Sarah as well. But I think that should be included in the staff briefing to the commission, because I don't know that, I think commissioners are, I don't know what the I think that should be included at least in the staff briefing to the commission.
Yes, understood. And I think we can definitely provide that. I know it's disappointing that this is, moving forward. We can't stop it. We can't impede that process. There's not a whole lot to be discussed at this point. But it is likely that this may be a regular hearing item for the county board in May. we're waiting to get some feedback there, but it was decided that this wouldn't need to be heard at the Planning Commission, just given the simplicity of undoing the use permit. But
Okay.
certainly I'll provide that feedback to our leadership and CPHD and make sure that that's relayed.
Okay, thank you.
I think I saw a hand.
Yeah, Betty's got
that's-
her hand up.
Sorry. So am I understanding that those storefronts on Columbia Pike are going to be empty with nothing in them?
So presently they're empty, I think due to the fire that occurred on the site last summer and the condition that those buildings were found in. They were condemned by the county building official. So that condemned status remains for all of those spaces except for the CVS. And the applicant is working with the county on bringing those spaces back up to compliance. I think they're seeking tenants for those spaces, and when tenants are identified, the applicant will work to bring those spaces up to a safety standard that allows the building official to lift the condemned status. But I see Amy has her hand up too and might have something to add.
Yeah, just to share a little information. The Fillmore Garden Apartments Shopping Center was able to get the condemned notice lifted on 3 of the retail spaces, 2611, 2609, and 2607. So basically the 3 retail spaces next to the CVS. The other 2 spaces, the other 3 spaces, I'm sorry, have bigger challenges. However, our understanding is that the property management team there is actively pursuing retail tenants for at least 3 of the spaces.
I'm sorry, did I hear you say that the Fillmore Gardens owner is pursuing leases for spaces right now?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah, this is Betty again. I'm sorry. That's very good because, we're trying to revitalize Columbia Pike, and vacant storefront property right in such a critical location is probably not a good thing. So thank you for the extra information.
Sure.
And just Olivia, for context, I mean, this is going to sound like a threat. That's only because I'm not capable of not modulating my voice the right way because I had 4 hours of sleep last night because of Rugrats. I am going to include it in my form-based code report, in my AWG report. I don't think it's not. I'm not like spilling any beans. I don't think. I would prefer, staff is going to be able to answer any questions that are going to come up in ways that I can't. So I don't want to be the only word on it. It's I really don't like. I'm not saying what I'm not saying is staff briefs the planning commission or else, right? Like I think it's my responsibility to at a minimum make sure it's mentioned in the AWG liaison report to the planning commission. I just am not confident that I will be able to satisfactorily answer any questions that commissioners might have. So that's another reason I think staff should be prepared to at least say something about it, because I would prefer to be able to just throw it to you and your colleagues. But I don't imagine that it will take it would probably come on the second day, and I can't imagine that commissioners are going to want to spend a whole lot of time on it after Melwood.
Mm-hmm. I will be there for the Barcroft, for a different Barcroft item at the Monday Planning Commission meeting. If that's when you'll be giving out your
maybe
report.
I'll ask Sarah to ask that be raised on Monday. Then I might do that because Melwood is the only thing on Monday, so that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm really sorry. I don't mean to like belabor the point. I'm not trying to sound heavy-handed or anything like that. This, as you know, it's such a critical thing, and I think people are going to want to hear, and they're going to be relieved to hear that um, that that leases are active, the tenants are being actively pursued. It's just, it's one of those projects. I don't know. I should stop talking. Thank you, Olivia. I appreciate it.
I do see, just so we don't miss it, Mark had his hand
Yep.
up.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let me be net negative for a minute here. I do think, well, first off, I think that whole thing is a blight, and I think the Columbia base, or the Columbia Pike neighbors are getting less than we deserve. And I am happy to hear that the owners looking for tenants. I just wish them good luck by the fact that I mean, you can put lipstick on a pig that it looks terrible. And with the road construction, and this is just a Mark pet peeve, so we can take it with a grain of salt. But driving up and down Columbia Pike for the next freaking how many years that it's going to take them to complete the road, I think they're going to have a hard time getting people to go into those places. It's just, I mean, I know most of my neighbors now no longer go out to the Pike in their automobiles, at least, because you're never sure going to come back with all the pieces to your car. So anyhow, that's just my rant. I'll be quiet now. Thanks for indulging me.
All right, I can share
Thanks.
one other update,
I guess
unless,
Betty.
oh, I see
Sorry,
Betty.
I gotta cut you off, Olivia. Yeah, you see it too.
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry, and then I'll let you guys go. This is Betty again. I do wonder if it's given that empty storefronts just invite, the wrong impression of Columbia Pike, and they also tend to invite less activity on the street, which is good for the street. I do wonder if this is something that we could reach out to the Arts Commission and ask them if there are artists who could maybe, while they're waiting to fill those spaces, at least populate the storefronts with something artistic and pretty and inviting. Just curious.
Amy, I saw your hand shoot
Yeah.
up.
We have been talking with Sushmita Mazumdar with Studio Pause, and as well as the property management team, to try to come up with some creative ways, if the space isn't occupied, to at least have something on the storefront that's artistic. And those things are still working through. We understand the property owners and the management team are, dealing with some tough stuff right now, and we want to do everything we can to make it look less of a blight. So any connections, any suggestions, please reach out. We'd love to hear all and every idea.
Maybe the county can buy it and start work on the library earlier, because we've got so much money in the budget. I didn't mean that. That's a joke. That's not even a good one. Olivia, you had a second update for us.
Yeah, one last item, and hopefully you can see my pointer on the screen.
I cannot.
You cannot? Okay. Well, just over by Pike West, you come down to Columbia Pike, like come down south to Columbia Pike. There's that Sunoco gas station located at like 5200 Columbia Pike. In
I can't see your pointer now, by the way.
You can.
Yeah, when it's not, yes.
We can't see
Okay.
it.
It doesn't have a laser item, but it's
No,
it's
there it
just
is.
above
Okay.
the Columbia
Okay.
Hills.
I'll just keep moving it around and then hopefully it shows up for most of you. But this is the site here. It's got an existing kind of vehicle service operations and the gas pump. And the applicant is looking to is filing a use permit to officially designate it as a vehicle service establishment and enclose a third bay there. But as part of that application, because of setback limitations, they're also requesting a rezoning to C2. There was no path forward for a gas station through the form-based code. So that item is currently tracking right now to go to the county board in June. And that item will, Daniel, go to the planning commission. I don't know that it will be an AWG discussion just because they're not proposing to develop under the form-based code. But all in all, very minor changes to the site. But again, you'll hear the planning commission will hear a much more in-depth overview of the proposed changes to establish that use permit and for that rezoning. But just
That's
wanted
not
to
gonna
flag that here for
trigger-
the Pike.
That's not going to trigger an LRPC meeting, is it?
No, it's not.
Linda and then Amy.
Yeah, sorry, but I never saw the pointer. Can you identify a block number for where you're talking about?
So the site is, let's see, the site is
Cross streets,
A
something?
block
Uh,
east of the Shell and 5500.
A block
let me see
east.
if I can-
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
Oop, my screen's frozen, sorry.
Yeah, still can't see any pointers. Okay, so a block east of the Shell. Okay.
Yeah, it's the bottom left corner of that diagram.
And Olivia,
Yeah, that
you
used to
look
be
like you're
there.
trying to bring your screen back up.
Trying to bring it back up.
I think it's right next to Frederick Court. Linda.
Gotcha. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and Columbia Forest is endorsing that
Okay.
because of all of the traffic issues that happen with that particular gas station.
Yeah.
You said
it's
endorsing?
Yeah.
Columbia Forest is supporting the
Okay.
application.
Well, that's probably all. Okay. That's probably
Yeah.
all anyone. That would,
Yeah, they're
but speaking as one commissioner, that would end the conversation for me, but hopefully others are willing to be so reasonable.
Yep, they're formalizing some of the parking. I know, right now there can be a lot of cars parked on the site, so that will be one benefit. And one of those vehicle service kind of areas is currently not enclosed. So the owner's proposing to enclose it, which should again help with noise, and other kind of service activities that currently happen unsheltered.
Amy, I see your hand up, but I'm going to ask one more question. Sorry. Is
No
there
worries.
any opportunity in this process to reduce? We've got 3 curb cuts, and one of the reasons that I just heard that the Columbia Forest is endorsing it is because it could help with the traffic situation. Is there any opportunity here to eliminate one of those curb cuts, preferably one of the 2 on the Pike?
So I won't speak for transportation staff, but I know we have asked that question. I think the challenge on the site is the refueling for the gas pumps and the size of those refueling trucks that are needed.
Mm-hmm.
It appears that all of these curb cuts basically are necessary for the movements of those trucks.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's not
that is the
surprising.
challenge right now.
It's a really tight space there.
Yep, it is.
Yeah.
I just hate to see it, but we all do. Anything on? I'm sorry to keep people, but anything on either Glebe and 11th or on what's the other one that was purple?
The frame shop.
Frame shop sites.
Yeah, the frame shop they're still working through some staff comments. I think we were hoping to bring that to you, well, this month. We'll see if we can get it to the AWG in July, likely.
Okay.
And then on the Exxon station, no forward movement on that one. They're still working on addressing staff comments.
Okay. Ed?
Yeah, well, is there any update on the Bank of America building? What is the status of that?
No status updates on that one since the entitlements.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what does that mean, entitlements?
Since the form-based code use permit was approved in, I think that was in February of 2023.
What you want to do is now consistent with
Thank you.
zoning,
Mhm.
as opposed to, Mark, I was on the planning commission for 5 years before I understood that entitlement and permitting were two completely different processes. But then I'm a slow learner sometimes. Anything else, Olivia?
No, I think I see one more hand raised.
That's Ed. Ed, do you, well, okay, Linda.
Is there anything going on with 2400? The commercial buildings in front of Ed's neighborhood? I thought they were going to do a complete redesign. I thought they were moving
Mhm.
forward, and every time I am on the bus going past there, the businesses are still there. I haven't seen any sign of anything.
Oh, the Rappahannock coffee site.
You're right.
Yeah, that one too. The owner, I think because of the state COVID-19 extension provisions, typically we would see some of these form-based code projects come back to the county and sometimes the AWG to extend the life of those use permits because they only, are approved for 3 years, and then, they have 3 years to kind of break ground before they expire. But because of that COVID extension, it essentially has extended some of these permits to on, the order of 5 years or so. So I think it's maybe lessened the urgency, for some of these applicants, but I think we're also just seeing some market conditions that are making some of these projects move a little more slowly.
Do we think that the project is in jeopardy? And are there other projects that are in jeopardy after what's happened with the Elliott? Projects that have been approved, and I certainly understand extensions were done for tons of things because of COVID, but do we think that there are other things that are in jeopardy?
Not to our knowledge at this point. I think the items we covered this evening are the ones that we're aware of.
Okay, thank you.
All right, seeing no other hands, thank you, everyone. And this time, unless Olivia, you have anything else, we will be adjourned.
That's all.
All right, have a good evening, everyone. Talk to you next time.
All right,
Good
thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.